Hey guys, and welcome to Drive Steady. Recently Ferrari released its latest hypercar and it's going to be called the SF90. Isn't it interesting how Ferrari comes up with these names? You think about it, it's like SF90. Where did you come up with that one? But anyway, in this video we'll take you back in time and review a brief history of Ferrari hypercars or supercars going back to the 80s and talk about the SF90 in comparison to those cars. So let's get started. The first car we want to talk about is the Ferrari Testarossa. It debuted at the Paris Motor Show in 1984 as an heir to the 512. Testarossa means redhead in Italian, and the Testarossa is a beautiful car, which is a big understatement. The engine was a 12-cylinder that pumped out 380 horsepower, and it was the first 4-valve per-cylinder engine Ferrari ever put in a production car. It went from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, which is essentially 0 to 62 miles an hour in 5.8 seconds. Just think about that for a second, how far we've gotten nowadays. It seems like a decently powered 4-door sedan can now get 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds. But that's the day and age we live in now. So back to the Testarossa, it had a 5-speed manual transmission, and of course it had a rear engine configuration. Two of the coolest parts of the Testarossa are that it had the huge side intake vents and the flip-up headlights, which were very popular throughout the 90s. Many of these were underappreciated but are now coming along in popularity, and you're seeing the prices go up for the clean, well-kept models. Anyways, the Testarossa was in production until 1991, where 7,177 examples were built. An interesting fact is that there was one unit or one example built as a Spider, and it went to a Fiat executive. I'm not really sure where that car is now, probably in somebody's collection somewhere in a secret location that nobody knows. The next car I wanted to talk about is the Ferrari F40, and this is probably the most polarizing Ferrari ever made. It's the poster car equivalent to the Lamborghini Countach. The F40 was built to celebrate Ferrari's 40th anniversary, and man does it look amazing when you look at it even today. The F40 had a 90-degree turbocharged V8 putting out 478 horsepower, which was mated to a 5-speed manual transmission. Isn't it interesting that all of these performance cars came with manual transmissions? It's probably because the automatics from back in the day weren't as sophisticated as they are today. The F430 got to 60 in 4.2 seconds, which was Ferrari's fastest car at the time. It was produced from 1987 to 1992, and an interesting piece of the F40 is that it's the last new car presentation that Enzo Ferrari attended prior to his death in 1988. Enzo Ferrari is the company founder, if you're curious. The next car is the Ferrari F50, and it was the closest thing that Ferrari could make to a production F1 car in the 90s. It was the purest approach to high performance, as it didn't have a lot of the safety features that would be required today, such as analog brakes and power steering and etc. etc. It definitely didn't have a rear camera, I'll guarantee you that. While the F40 was powered by a V8, the F50 was powered by a glorious naturally aspirated V12, which put out 520 horsepower at a hair-raising 8,000 RPM. The F50 came with a manual transmission and had a carbon fiber tub, which was crazy since this car came out in the 90s. Many new supercars are adopting that today. But the car was only produced between 95 and 97, and a grand total of 349 cars were made. So this is an extremely exclusive, rare car. The next car is the Enzo Ferrari, and it was the last of the old school hypercars from Ferrari, in our opinion. The car's official name is Enzo Ferrari, named, like I said, after the company's founder. However, it's unofficially called the Ferrari Enzo. It features a lot of carbon fiber, much like the F50 in the body panels and the tub, and it uses a F1 derived transmission. The engine would be the last of the naturally aspirated V12s from Ferrari. I know the LaFerrari, which I'm going to talk about next, is also powered by a naturally aspirated V12, but it uses electric engines to boost the power, so that doesn't necessarily count. The Enzo's engine had a monstrous 660 horsepower and 485 pound-feet of torque. It was blazingly fast as it got to 0 to 60 in 3 seconds and 100 miles per hour in 6.6 seconds. Again, a very exclusive car. Only 400 examples of the Enzo were made. Next is the LaFerrari, and the LaFerrari represented Ferrari's first ever hypercar and set on a new path of technology. It debuted at the Geneva Auto Show in 2013 and was produced until 2016. Again, only 400 examples made. The engine was a V12 making 788 horsepower at a screaming 9,000 RPM, and it was boosted with an electric motor that generated 161 horsepower for a grand total of 949 horsepower and 663 pounds-feet of torque. The Enzo, along with the McLaren P1 and Porsche 918, brought the birth of the name hypercar. These cars were so blisteringly fast and reached almost unimaginable acceleration and performance that people were just boggled by the performance and numbers these cars were able to achieve in a racetrack or even in normal people's hands. The LaFerrari got to 60 in less than 3 seconds and 124 miles per hour in less than 7 seconds. Think about that for a second. 124 miles per hour in less than 7 seconds. That's just insane. It's mind-boggling. The LaFerrari's breakthrough in technology and the hybrid engine paved the way for what is now the new SF90. So now let's talk about the new SF90 Stradale. It's Ferrari's fastest car ever, and it happens to be a plug-in hybrid with close to 1,000 combined horsepower, much like the LaFerrari. The SF90 is named to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the Scuderia Ferrari racing team, and predictably it takes another big step in achieving performance by technology, which will probably trickle into other lower level Ferraris in the near future. Let's discuss the exciting parts of the car. Then that's the engine. It has a 4-liter turbocharged V8 derived from the 488 GTB. We may have officially seen the end of the V12 Ferrari, guys. The Enzo and LaFerrari prices will basically shoot up another 30% if that holds true. But the V8 in the SF puts out 769 horsepower and 590 foot-pounds of torque, and it's the first time since the F40 that Ferrari has put a V8 in their highest model car. Moving to the electric engines, the SF has 3 of them, 2 in the front powering each wheel and 1 behind in between the engine and the transmission. So the electric engines produce an extra 217 horsepower and can run in electric only mode for 15.5 miles and reach 84 miles per hour. Imagine this, how weird is it going to be when you see one of these ultra exotic looking red SF90s blow by you like a Tesla and all you hear is wind noise. Oh, that's gonna be so weird. But an interesting point is that when this car operates in EV mode, it only spins the front wheels. Therefore, the SF is the first ever front wheel drive Ferrari. Did you ever imagine that, a front wheel drive Ferrari? But hey, it's happening, look at this. This isn't the only first that the SF achieves for Ferrari. You're going to see that there's many more as I keep describing it. But the SF marks the first time a Ferrari mid-engine car is fitted with all-wheel drive. Yes, SF is now fitted with all-wheel drive. So it's spinning at all four corners, and I don't blame Ferrari for doing this, as achieving higher levels of acceleration and handling basically now requires all-wheel drive. The engine is mated to an all-new 8-speed dual-clutch automatic. Again, no manuals are offered in these high-performance cars. You want to achieve the fastest times, and the automatics are shifting faster than any human. So Ferrari says the all-new 8-speed dual-clutch lowers the center of gravity compared to the 7-speed unit they had before. You want to hear something else that's interesting? The transmission doesn't have a reverse gear. The way it works is that the car backs up using the front electric motors. I'm not sure how that works in practice, but hey, apparently the Acura NSX also uses this method as well. Moving to the interior, it's typically minimalistic and simple. It features a huge 16-inch curved display in front of the driver. And let me tell you, everything is centered around that screen, as Ferrari has basically eliminated all buttons from the interior of the car. Everything is touch sensitive, and in addition to that, another first for Ferrari is that this is the first production car that they have fitted with a heads-up display. We're seeing a lot of manufacturers do this now. Corvettes have had it for a very long time. A lot of other American cars have had it for a long time. BMW M cars have had it. But Ferrari is now moving in this direction as well. And even though we're not big fans of heads-up displays like we've mentioned in the past, we understand why these cars are trying to achieve high levels of performance and trying to keep concentration on the road when driving and not having to look down to see how fast you're going or what gear you're in. But one of the cool things about the interior is the gear selector, which was made to resemble an old school Ferrari gated shifter. I think that's a very nice touch going from Ferrari, going back to their heritage with the traditional gated shifter design. Moving to the exterior, and it's all new and it looks very edgy and modern with a lot of aero openings for downforce. And I do see some slight resemblances of the 488 from certain angles. The SF has an active aero wing panel out back, and when all systems are go with that active aero, it generates 860 pounds of downforce at 155 miles an hour. So that's pretty much the car in a nutshell. Not much information has been released, and just our thoughts on the car. When you compare it to the LaFerrari made 949 horsepower and weighed 3,495 pounds. The SF makes 986 horsepower, so that's an increase in horsepower, and it weighs a little bit less at 3,461 pounds. Here's another car that on paper, the SF that is, probably doesn't seem like it's going to go faster because that horsepower difference and weight difference is negligible at best. But the trick here with the SF is that active aero and the all-wheel drive system. I bet this car will accelerate to 60 in close to 2.5 seconds or less. The one thing that the LaFerrari has the SF beat in is top speed, 217 versus 211. But who cares at that point? They're both blisteringly fast and have very high top speeds. If I had to pick between the SF and the LaFerrari, at this time, I would pick the LaFerrari because of its looks and the fact that it has the V12 in it. However, if you ask me to pick from one of the cars I mentioned earlier from Ferrari's history, I would no doubt pick the F50 and then the F40. Those cars are just something special. Nothing will ever be made that comes close to those things. They're cars from a different era, much like when we refer to muscle cars from the 60s. So no doubt the F40 and the F50 over any of these, as they are extremely special cars. From the outside, it's difficult to gauge the styling and the proportions of the SF from the photos and video, but many who have seen it in person say that it looks much better than in the photos. If I had to pass judgment just from looking at the photos, I would say that I'm not really a fan of the rear, even though I can see what Ferrari is trying to do back there. I can see some 488 and even some F40 and F50 with a smaller scale aero wing. Ferrari mentioned that it's not all about the function, but they designed the form to follow the function and that it should still resemble a piece of art. So that was their motto when designing this car. We'll pass a firm judgment in due time when better photos or the opportunity to see one in person present itself, but that's where we stand at this time. The front of the car isn't that eye-catching either, but it's better than the rear. I do like the open mouth design, which I'm sure is made for sucking in as much air as possible and to create downforce. Overall, the SF represents another big step from Ferrari down the path of the inevitable, that's electricity and technology-driven cars. As much as I hate to admit, these hypercars or the top-of-the-line cars from Ferrari and Porsche and McLaren and also Lamborghini will dictate what we see in performance cars for the next decade. And that basically means less mechanical pieces and more electronic driven performance. I just hope that manufacturers are able to blend in the feeling of driving into these cars and they don't solely rely on the blinding acceleration and the gizmo type numbers. We could only hope. Thanks for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.